What's up, hackers, and welcome to Chill Code. Kind of. It's actually not going to be that chill given the topic at hand, but I wanted to do a kind of emergency stream to talk a little bit about a request that I saw from the developers of Signal. If you're not familiar with Signal, it's an end-to-end encrypted chat application that is used by both good folks and not so good folks, but importantly right now, Signal is being used by protesters in Iran to communicate about the protests against the authoritarian regime that they are trying to change. And so, as a believer in, kind of an old school idea, but a believer in freedom and the fact that I do not think that the Iranian people should have to live under the kinds of strictures that they're forced to live under unless they choose to do so, and it doesn't seem like they are, then we can help them out a little bit. And the way that we're going to help them out is by setting up a Signal proxy. Signal's getting blocked in Iran, at least the direct servers the Signal uses. However, it turns out you can set up a Signal proxy server that folks can use to access the application. I don't believe they should live under U.S. sanctions too. I mean, that is a whole other ball of wax. I think the two things are interrelated, though, for sure. So, we're going to go through the entirety of the process here, and I might modify it a little bit. Now, the first thing that they need you to do is you need to own a domain or a subdomain that you can control. So what I'm going to do is I am going to head over to my domain manager. Which is Google. And I'm just going to make sure that I'm logged in here. I know I'm doing this off screen, but that's kind of the first thing we need, is we need DNS. Okay. So I have a number of different domains that I own. I don't think this is sensitive information. So I'm going to use whisperwolf.net because I haven't done anything with that domain really. So I'm going to use it for this. So whisperwolf.net, pretty cool domain actually, I think. So we're going to call whisperwolf.net, and we're going to use two subdomains actually of it. So the first thing I'm going to do is get ready to set up my two DNS records. Now, in order to do this, I need the IP addresses of the servers that I'm going to use. So we're kind of teeing this up, but just know that you're going to need to have a domain name that you control in order to do this, okay? A subdomain is fine too. In fact, what we'll eventually be doing with this is probably like signal1.whisperwolf.net for AWS and signal2 for Azure. So just know that that's kind of how we're going to need to start here. That's kind of part one. Part two is going to be we're going to spin up a virtual machine in the cloud. We're going to demo how to do it both in AWS and in Azure. Now, if you're used to watching this stream, then you've done this with us before, but if you haven't, don't worry. We're going to kind of walk you through the entire process. You will need to have an AWS account. Free tier account is fine, or an Azure account. And there's a free tier for Azure or a pay-as-you-go, and then you can stay in the free tier. And also when you sign up for Azure, they give you a bunch of credit as well. So be aware that you can do this for extremely low cost or for free. The biggest cost is likely going to be the domain name that you choose to purchase. And I like Google Domains as a domain registrar. You can buy the domain right there. You can pay for it. You can manage it right through there. Very easy to do. Falcon712, malware guy, good to see you. So to start, we're going to spin up these machines. I'm going to start in AWS. And here I am in AWS. And I'm going to go over to EC2. By the way, if some of you who are familiar with AWS are like, how did he get dark mode? That's a cookie you can just set. I found out there is a cookie that you can set that says interface theme or console theme or something like that. You can just change it from light to dark, and then you have dark mode in AWS. I guess not everywhere, though. That's unfortunate. All right, so we're going to spin up a new machine, and some of you might be like, why isn't he doing this via the command line? Yes, I could do this via the command line. Yes, I could do this via Terraform. the reason I'm doing this point and click is to make sure that everybody who watches this video is able to follow along. I want to make sure as many people as possible are capable of spinning one of these things up, just in case, right? We want to have a plethora of options for proxy signal for signal proxy servers. Okay, so we're going to go to launch instance here and click launch instance. This is going to start the process of spinning up a virtual machine in AWS. Okay, I'm going to call this thing, this is just the name for it, and this is kind of like, this is the new interface really for it. This is not how EC2 used to look. We're going to call this signal proxy -1, I think, since this will be our first one, and then Azure will host our second. I'm going to use as our template our Amazon machine image. Rather than Amazon Linux, I'm going to use Ubuntu just to reduce any space for error here, because Amazon Linux is mostly fine, but it has its own, quirks. Ubuntu I'm super familiar with, so I'm just going to select Ubuntu. Notice that the tier is free tier eligible, and that should be fine for our purposes, honestly. Should be fine. So I'm going to kick this off and just let it do its thing. T2 micro, so 1 CPU, 1 gig of memory. Yeah, that looks good. Now for the key pair, this is how we're going to sign into this thing, and so this is a little bit different, right? In order to do this, it's a little bit different. We are going to sign into this thing with SSH. So this is probably, if you're not familiar with the command line, going to be the hardest part of this. So just be aware of that. But to do this, we're going to set up a new SSH key pair. Okay. Yeah. We're going to create a new key pair. And we'll call this signal proxy -1. We're going to make it a .pem for OpenSSH. If you use PuTTY, if you know what you're doing with PuTTY, you can select that. I'm going to use PEM because I'm going to be doing this in my WSL command line. AWS has been updating a lot of interfaces. Good to know. I spend most of my cloud work time in Azure, so don't have to deal with that as much. Okay, so this is getting downloaded. I'm going to just, put it in downloads. That's fine. Fantastic. So that's my private key. And the public key is going to get added to the virtual machine. Now, this next part, I'm going to switch over. I'm going to kind of hide my screen for just a second, because I'm changing it to allow SSH traffic from my IP, and I don't want you to see my IP. I think that you're going to see it at some point later anyway, but as long as I can, I'm going to prevent that. Now, the next thing that I have to do for the security rules here is, yep, there it is. Nothing I can do about that, but it is what it is. Is we're going to allow HTTPS traffic from the internet. And the reason we're going to do that is because Signal is going to be using port 443 to make this happen. And 80. So we need both 80 and 443 available. So we're also going to enable HTTP traffic. So we're allowing 22 from my IP, HTTPS, and HTTP. Okay. Everything looks good here. I think we're ready to go. We're going to launch this instance. So that's going to fire off, do its thing. Now, what do we do with this .pem file? What do we do with this private key file? Well, for this, I'm going to go over to my Windows subsystem for Linux. You can do this. You can do this in Windows. I should probably show you how to do it in Windows. For PowerShell. We'll try it both ways once we have this thing set up. But I'm going to copy from home downloads signal proxy 1.pem. I'm going to copy this into my Iran protest 2022 folder. And importantly, this is the thing that you got to do. You have to chmod it to 0400, or put another way, read only by the owner. And the reason you need to do that is so that SSH doesn't freak out about the private key that you're using. Looking at our permissions on this thing, you can see that I only have read permissions on it. Now, can you do this in Windows? You can. You can change the permissions using the permissions editor as normal. And Windows even has an SSH client, okay? These days. So you can do it there. Pay no attention to how awesome my PowerShell terminal looks. This is, in fact, just regular out-of-the-box PowerShell. There's nothing under the hood special going on. It's just some theming. Okay, let's take a look at how our instance is going. Oh, hello, Brian. Welcome, BreakSec community. Good to see you all. For those of you who are just joining us, we are demonstrating how to set up a Signal proxy server on both AWS and Azure in support of the Iran protests, as was requested by the Signal devs. So we're going to do that. So we just launched, I hope, our EC2 instance. How are we doing? It's up and running. It has a public IP. Very, very good. So in order to connect to this thing, we're going to grab that public IP. You can also use the domain name, but I like using the public IP. Copy it right from here. Just click on this little copy. And then in your terminal, we're going to do SSH-I for identity, signalproxy.1.pem, Ubuntu at that IP address. Now, Ubuntu is the default user in Amazon Ubuntu instances. And so press enter, YES to accept the connection. And we're in. Okay, so we're into our AWS machine. And I want to leave it there for a moment. And now we're going to go over to Azure and do the same thing. I'm also going to quickly split my window in a sort of weird way so that I can have SSH here and here. And have just the terminal here. You'll see why I'm doing that in just a second. But okay, so I'm connected to this Ubuntu machine. Triplexity, thank you so much for the gifts to Osprey. Appreciate that. So we're going to go over to Azure and do sort of the same thing. Now for Azure, which is something that I'm a little bit more familiar with, we're going to start by creating a resource group. Just to make it easier to manage, this is just an ergonomics thing that I like doing. So I'm going to create a resource group here. Nice and easy. It's on my subscription. We're going to call it Iran Protests 2022. And I'm going to stick it in West US 2. That's my region of choice. And everything else looks good. I don't need tags for this. Easier to manage billing. Yeah, faux show. That's exactly why I like doing it. For cleanup and for billing observation. Okay, so we're going to click create. Make me a resource group. There's my Iran Protests 2022 resource group. Lovely. And we're now starting to nest our blades here in Azure. So from here, then we're going to create, you can do this a bunch of different ways, but I like doing it this way. Get out of here. Okay, so we're going to create an Ubuntu server 22.04 LTS. If you don't see this, you can just search for Ubuntu and it'll show up for you. But happily, it was kind of the first thing that we saw. So Ubuntu server 22.04, exactly what we want. I'll take it. Okay, so Azure subscription looks good. It's already set to be in the Iran Protests 2022 group. The virtual machine name is going to be signal proxy -2. I'm still going to put it in West US 2. I do not know why it doesn't get that, even though the resource group was in the West US 2 region. Everything else is looking good here. x64 is fine. Standard size. Now, notice that this is not free, right? 2 vCPUs, 8 gigs of memory. That's $70 a month. So watch out for that, right? If we want to see all sizes, we want to knock this down a little bit. Here are all of the machines. And if you want to sort by price a month, right? The 1.1, the B1S, the general purpose is like $7.59 a month. That's about as good as it gets. But remember, when you sign up for Azure, when you start, you're going to get some... Yeah, B1S is $380 a month with 512 megs of RAM. I like to go 1-in-1, so I'm going to go B1S, right? That's fine. That's right. You get $200 for 30 or 90 days. I think it's 90 days now. Okay? Again, we're going to do an SSH public key. So same situation. And we're going to generate a new key pair. Right? And Azure user is the user in this case rather than Ubuntu. You can change this if you want. If you want to standardize it to be Ubuntu across the board, you can do that. I like to kind of leave it as is. They do have a student program. They also have a developer program that gives you a bunch of other cool stuff as well. All right, so we're going to generate this key pair, and then we're going to set up the inbound ports. We're going to allow selected. We're going to allow SSH. Oh, perfect. SSH, HTTPS, and HTTP. That's exactly what we're going to allow. Now, here's kind of the problem, though. This is the trick. If you do this, it'll allow SSH from everywhere, which is not what we want. So don't do that. Allow HTTPS and HTTP from everywhere. That's fine. Leave SSH unchecked. Leave SSH unchecked. Just chill for that for a second. We will add SSH more restrictively in a moment. We don't need to mess with the disk. The disks are fine. Networking. Virtual networking. It can have its own VNet. That's fine. It can have a public IP. In fact, it has to have a public IP, so that is fine as well. We're going to create a new one. That's all good. And we already selected the inbound ports, right? And no, I'm not going to create a separate NSG. I will add it directly onto this thing. Everything else is good. I do want to delete the public IP and NIC when the VM is deleted. That's just easy for me. Don't need load balancing. Management. None of this should be checked because you don't need it. Monitoring. Disable your monitoring. You don't need that. And other than that, you can put a tag on it if you want, like app, signal proxy, or RON protests or something like that. But other than that, I think we're good to go. All right, very good. And then we will create this. So we're going to download the private key and create the resource. And luckily, it's even named pretty much the same way. Okay. So that's spinning up. And let's copy that SSH key over as well. And we're going to chmod again, chmod 0400, signal proxy 2_key.pem. So what's getting created? We've got the VNet, we've got the NSG, we've got... Okay, the deployment is complete. We're going to go to the resource. Very exciting. Now, we go to networking, and this is where we're going to allow stuff. This is where we're going to finally add SSH the right way. We're going to add this inbound port rule. Source, my IP address, which again, you're just going to see. The source port range is fine. The destination is this IP address. The service is going to be SSH. And the action is going to be allow. The priority 330 is fine. That'll put it right here. And allow my IP address SSH inbound. That looks fine too. So we're going to add that inbound security rule. That's way better than allowing SSH from everywhere, right? Then people aren't knocking at your door from everywhere on Earth. That's what we want to have happen. Okay. So once that rule is applied, go back to overview, and we have ourselves a public IP address. We're going to copy that, go back over to our terminal, and in this bottom section here, we're going to SSH-I with the signal proxy 2 Azure user at, and then the IP address. Maybe it's not actually ready. Actually, what it says is that the agent status is not ready. That's a little bit different than the machine not being ready. Falcon. The machine agent, like, the machine can be up and running before the agent is ready to do its thing. There we go. Just need another second. Okay, so again, we're using that private key, and we're in. Now, I have to remember how to do this, but I really want to try to do this. Because it's cool. Yeah, there we go. All right, this is my favorite trick for tmux. Not my favorite trick, really, but it is cool. So I'm using a terminal multiplexer called tmux. Pretty common. And you don't have to do this. This is just... It's me showing off. But it is fun. So now that we have both of these servers up and running, what we can do is with tmux set w synchronize panes on. And now, both of my windows will have the same commands entered. So sudo apt update for both of these. And then the commands get entered into both windows. That's some old sysadmin sorcery right there. If you're on Linux, a bunch of different terminal emulators have the ability to do this. I know Terminator has it, as it's called Broadcast in Terminator, and I think Console has it as well. Console with a K. All right, we just needed to update this, and now we're going to start following the install Docker instructions. So I'm going to pop this out, move it over here, and head over here. Nope, where's my terminal? Right now, we're pretty much in terminal land. All right, so we've already updated. So we're going to do sudo apt install. Actually, we don't need to do that. Just kidding. All of these are already installed in Ubuntu 22.04. Okay, now this is some new stuff that we have to do for adding the official GPG key for the Docker repositories. So we're going to sudo, we're going to make a folder called etc apt keyrings. Cool. Looks good. And then we're going to run this curl command, which generally speaking, you shouldn't just run curl commands from the internet, but this one is right from Docker. And what we're doing is we're getting the GPG key and we're creating this file docker.gpg. Okay? That's what's going on there. Cool. Now, if we, just to show you, if we cat etc apt keyrings docker.gpg, they both have the same junk in there. All right. Now that that's done, we can add to our sources, the places where Ubuntu looks to download its updates. To do that, we're going to run this echo command, which as I've pasted it, I'm getting a warning from Windows Terminal, but that's fine. Right? So it says echo, right? This looks pretty okay to me. And then sudo t etc apt sources.list.d docker.list. I just want to make sure that that file looks correct. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to cat that out. All right, it does indeed look okay. That's exactly what we want to see. So now that that's done, we can run sudo apt update again. Notice that now it's touching Docker, right? It sees Docker. So now we're gonna sudo apt install -y for yes, the Docker Community Edition, the CLI for it, the container runtime called containerd.io, and the Docker Compose plugin. So we're going to let that install. For those of you who joined us after the start, I will also mention that we are... So what we're doing is we're setting up a Signal proxy as listed in these instructions here. We're making some slight modifications to them just for convenience, but one thing that you will need to do in order to complete this project is you need to have a domain name or a subdomain or two that you control. So I'm here in my domain registrar, and you're going to need to have yours ready to go for the next steps coming up real soon. Okay? So just be aware of that, right? Because I'm going to be using my domain whisperwolf.net for this, and you're going to want to use yours. So if you don't have a domain name, you can buy one at domains.google.com. The basic ones will run you $12 a year. It's not that much if you want to get a basic domain. And by the way, for this, it doesn't have to be a cool domain. It just has to work. Right? It doesn't even have to be a .net or .com. It could be something a little bit weirder. For example, one of my projects is WTF bins, and the domain, the top level domain is .wtf. This was really affordable. Okay, how's that install going? Delightful. Okay, so everything looks good here. We're going to just make sure that the Docker daemon is running by running sudo docker image ls. All right, we get the same response. They're both empty, but that's fine. Okay. Very good. Now we're going back over to the Signal instructions. Now that we've SSH'd into the server and we've installed Docker, we're coming into step 3 here. We're going to clone the Signal TLS proxy repository. So this is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to do git clone and then that repository. So this is exactly right. and we'll run that in both VMs at the same time. You don't have to do that. You can do it one at a time, or either if you're just doing one, which most of you would be doing anyway, you can just do that. Just pick one. You don't have to do both AWS and Azure. Okay. Now that we're there, we're going to CD into Signal TLS Proxy. Okay. This is the part where we need to have the domain, because the next thing that's going to happen is if we look into the contents of this directory, it'll show us that it has this init certificate.sh script. This is going to use Let's Encrypt, okay, to enter, to create a certificate, an SSL certificate that you can use. And it says you will be prompted to enter the domain or subdomain that is pointing to this server's IP address. Well, we need to have a server that is pointing to this server's IP address. So at this point, it's DNS time. And it might take a couple minutes, right? So we're going to wait. Once we do this, we're going to give it a minute. So I'm going to go over to DNS here. And depending on your registrar, these settings will be, in different places. I know that like GoDaddy or wherever has them in different locations. But here I go to DNS, and I'm going to add signal1.whisperwolf.net. And then I'm going to make it an A record. An A record is for IPv4 addresses like so. And I'm going to go back over to my EC2 instances and get the public IP of the instance. That is what I need to put into that field. I'm then going to create a new record, signal2. Also an A record. And I'm going to take the public IP from the Azure machine and put that there. Then I'm going to save this out. So now I have 2 DNS records, but keep in mind that DNS has to propagate throughout the internet. So Google is pretty quick, but it can usually take my experience is about 5 to 10 minutes for it to propagate. So we'll give it a few. Graham, how are you? Things are going well today. We're demonstrating how to set up a Signal proxy to support the protests in Iran. But while we're waiting for the DNS to propagate, I'll just take this opportunity to mention that I launched a new course 2 days ago. Python for Defenders, Part 1. It's available for free now at learn-taggart-tech.com. And what you will learn in Python for Defenders is the basics of using Python in Jupyter notebooks in preparation for building real defensive tools that you can use in a security operations center or incident response or other kinds of defensive roles. That will be in part 2, which is coming soon. Sci-Fi Gal, thank you so much for the follow. Sci-Fi Gal, what's your favorite spacecraft in all of science fiction? I have a couple of mine right here in front of me. I just picked this one up the other day. This is a nice die cast of the Normandy. Starship Enterprise, but which one? Do we like the Sovereign class? Do we have a refined palette? Do we like the Ambassador class? Or maybe you're a Star Trek Online player and you like the Enterprise F Odyssey Yorktown class. This is called vamping. Excelsior. Ugh. Yikes. All right. All right, it's up. Obi-Wan Kenobi ship, the Jedi Starfighter thing? Okay, these records are live. So we're good here, at which point we can continue with the script. Right, so we're going to run with sudo the init certificate.sh. At which point I will have to disable the echoing, or the broadcast, right? Yes it is. It says Docker Compose is not installed. Oh, they made a mistake. So they're looking for Docker Compose, the old school Python script. But these days, Docker Compose... No, Leon, it's installed. But the problem is that the Docker Compose plugin, it makes it a subcommand. Because it does Docker... If I do sudo Docker Compose, right? That's how it is. It doesn't go Docker-compose. So we can actually... fix it. We may have to fix their script. So that's okay. If we go into... Do I have Vim installed? Nice. We're gonna not do this. We're gonna just delete this conditional. Docker Compose is not installed. You can do this in Nano if you want. How new is that? I've yet to see that. It's literally in the last... Graham, it's been in the last 4 months. It's so new that it messed up my instructions for PWST. I had to explain that there's a... Like, as I was publishing the course, or recording the course, actually, I had to change it up because it is now... It's not a third party, or not a third party, but it's not an aftermarket... Wrong, too. After install step. It's not like an additional plugin. It's not DLC, basically. It is now part of the thing that you install when you install Docker. So now it's like subcommand of Docker, just like Docker image or Docker container. I was like, how do I want to describe this? Yeah, so it's not that anymore. Okay. Oh, it is absolutely for the best. It should have had original, like, first-class citizen support the whole time. Okay, so plainly this is not useful, and therefore, two things. We don't want to do like Command-V Docker Compose. We can just delete this entire check if we want. So I'm gonna use Vim to do that. Simply 4 for 4 lines because we have 4 lines here, and then D to delete those lines. Now, obviously, it's using Docker Compose somewhere. So we're going to just change this up. Yeah, here we go. So see where it has Docker Compose here? We're going to change this to Docker Compose run, like so. And I think that's pretty much what we need. Okay, so once that's done, save this up, fix the script, and let's try this one more time. Perfect. Now at this point I have to turn off my synchronized panes thing. And so in the top, I'm putting in signal1.whisperwolf.net. I'm not going to lie. I think that's a rad domain. I'm glad I got it. And down here, I'm putting in signal2. Whisperwolf.net. All right, now the Let's Encrypt thing comes down, does its thing. Okay, the certificate was successfully received for Signal 1 and Signal 2. Yes, I'm doing the syncing with Tmux. Yep, so just Control B or whatever your escape sequence is, and then colon, and then set W, synchronize panes, either on or off. Yep, I am a Tmux super fan. Okay. Now that we have done that, actually, we're ready to go. So we can do... We can actually re-enable the syncs. And we're going to do sudo, even though the instructions here say docker-compose, we just learned that's not a thing. So sudo docker compose up-d for detached mode. And the reason this will work, I'm going to Control-C just to show you. The reason this will work is because there's a docker compose.yaml file in here. And that is what docker compose by default is looking for. So sudo docker compose up-d. It goes and gets the certificate. Looks like it's doing some build. Yes, building a Docker image on a 1 CPU, 1 gig of RAM machine. That is actually something that I'm a little worried about now that I think about it. It'll be fine. Yeah, that's right. Fingers crossed, everybody. I don't think storage is the issue. Nah, we'll be okay. What Signal is the proxy for? It's Signal, the end-to-end encrypted chat app. The Signal Android app is registered to handle links from signal.tube. The app can automatically configure proxy support when you tap on a link from any other app. This step happens before any web request is made, so even if a sensor tries to block that domain, it won't accomplish anything. And Panda asked, why do I have 2 PowerShells running? Are you referring to these 2 PowerShells? Or are you referring to the fact that I have this and this? This is PowerShell. This is WSL, right? So this is Linux. It's not PowerShell. But if you're referring to this, you can't see it because it's on the other side. But what you're looking at right there, Nino, is actually, you see the little Twitch stats at the bottom left of your screen? That's what's running that. That is a custom script that I wrote that queries the Twitch API and brings in the latest Twitch stats. It just updates every 10 seconds. And I styled that instance of the Windows terminal to look a little retro, got some scan lines going, things like that. Easy peasy. So that's why there are 2 instances of the Windows terminal running. It's an Electron app. Yes, it is. Okay, so now if we just do sudo docker, I think service will do it. No, sudo docker container then. ls, we can see that we have our proxies up and running. Right? Looking good. And I believe the way that this works is that the reason that the cert bot is up and running is because this is set to auto renew the certificate, right? So it's kind of a set it and forget it situation. Don't need to worry about it. And then the last thing we need to do is use hashtag I ran a signal proxy. When you publicly post a signal.tube link, or if a particular server becomes too popular, it increases the chance that Iranian censors will simply add those IPs to the block list. I ran a signal proxy. Reply to this thread if you want the connection details. Follow me so I can DM you the link. How do you think the IRI cyber team is shutting down the internet in Iran? It's DNS. It's always DNS. Although in this case there might be some straight up IP blocks. There's an amazing picture. Let me see if I can find it. From protests a while ago in Turkey. Yeah, there it is. Protests a while ago where the Turkish government blocked the internet via DNS, and so folks were graffitiing Google's DNS IP addresses on the streets to allow people to bypass it. I think about this all the time. Yeah, I believe ISPs in Iran are state controlled. Okay, so this was a tight, hour stream, but we got this done. So we have 2 signal proxies up, signal1.whisperwolf.net, signal 2, and I will share those on social media and link to the video demonstrating how we do it. So that, friends, is how it is done. Any parting questions about how this works or how we did it or why we did it a certain way? We can exit out of our SSH sessions. We can close this pane. Thank you, Conundrum. Yes, I'm feeling much better. Yesterday was rough, but I'm feeling much better now that I've received my COVID booster. And that it has done its work rewriting my DNA. All right. Questions going once. Going twice. Well, if this was your first time here, first of all, you're very welcome. I strongly recommend that you join our Discord. It's a really welcoming, supportive community of learners. How would someone bypass ISP blocks? This is one way. It depends on the nature. Usually, the answer is finding an alternative ISP, depending on how locked down it is. That's what was going on in I think, some parts of not China. Man, it's going to drive me crazy. Oh, it was, yeah, Ukraine. Okay, so before we go, we're going to check out the hack list. Just so you know, there are lots of different people who are streaming information security content, and you might want to check them all out because they're all great. And by the way, I will be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific doing some blue team, some defensive cybersecurity in our lab. So if you're interested in learning how to protect against certain kinds of attacks and see how that goes, then I'd love to see you there. So that's going to do it for this time, friends. I know it was short, but I felt it was important to get this information out there and actually get a couple of proxies up and running. So we did some work today. So until next time, friends, please be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and happy hacking. We'll see you next time.